nanny one time.
Oh yeah?
I was a cop playing a nanny down on Pier 92. She's going to catch a boat, and all of a sudden, I had gum in my mouth. If you ever see the show, I walk over to her and I'm chewing gum.
Uh-oh.
So right away, I know to take the gum out all the time. Which way do you want me to look, Philly?
Directly at me.
All right.
You got a good background. You're perfectly lit. Okay, testing. We'll be there in just a second. Chris, when you get a chance, we're going to have you introduce yourself, say your full name, wherever you're from, whatever you're comfortable saying,
Yeah.
where you worked, how many years you were on the fire department, and tell us a little bit about the book.
All right. You ready?
Yep.
All right. My name is Chris Edwards. I'm a retired New York City firefighter. I worked up in 81 engine, 42 engine. Down in the Bronx, I did my whole career in the Bronx. I actually live up in a small town called Sparrowbush. It's all I have to do is open up my door and put my hand out, and I could probably shake hands with God. Live on top of a mountain. I spent my whole career down in the Bronx, which was 17 years. It was ended during an injury right before 9/11. Had gone in for multiple knee surgeries and reconstructive surgeries because they didn't want my career to end. I love the job so much. It's not just a job, it's a calling, it's a family. And those are the things that we really put together as a New York City firefighter. Um, I ended up writing a book after 9/11 when I retired. And the reason why I wrote that book was for my children. Not only did we lose 343 firemen on 9/11, but since 9/11, we've lost over 700, 800 firemen have died from numerous diseases from the World Trade Center. So I wanted my children to have something to read that I wrote for them instead of going to somebody else and hearing stories about the old man. So what I did is I wrote this book, but during the time that I moved up to Port Jervis, I actually started going to church. I had questioned my faith during this time after 9/11 and why bad things happen to great people, and started going to church, doing 5 days a week, plus on a Sunday I did actually 6 days a week. And during this time, I made a deal with God, and I know a lot of people tell me you can never do that, but I actually made a deal with God. And I said, God, if you give me an answer on why bad things happen to great people. And after about 2.5 months of going to church, I never got an answer from God, and I was kind of upset. I went out in front of the church, and I was looking up at the church, and if anybody seen me, my hands were moving up and down. It's the way, it's the way a lot of Italians talk. But I was telling God, you haven't given me my answer, and I come to church, and we made a deal. And what eventually ended up happening was I looked to my left, and in this town of Port Jervis, there's a Point Peter. It's the highest point in the town. It's a giant mountain that you can climb up. I drive up, more or less. I wouldn't be able to climb up it. But I would drive up there every day after church, and I wrote notebooks. And I figured the closer I can get to heaven, the more God would hear me. So ended up getting black and white notebooks, and after about 2.5 years of going to church, I had about 5 or 6 notebooks. And those are the stories that I write about. Those are the stories that I want my children to hear. They're about hope, faith, and never giving up. And these are the 3 things that I've carried with me forever after 9/11. And now you start realizing that after 9/11, it's so more important on these little things that we overlook in life. The things that we look over during the time of our lifetime that we would actually think that, they were no big deal. But those are the things that make an impact on other people's lives. And those are the messages that I wanted to get across to a lot of people. Hope, faith, and never giving up. And those 3 things can carry you forever in your life. During this time with the book, I was helped along with a woman named Linda Lucas who helped me put the book together. She said it was a great message. I really didn't believe her at the time because I wanted to write it for my children. She gave it to 3 professors in the local college over here. They read it. They loved it. They loved the message. They told her they liked it. They wanted me to print it and publish it. I didn't believe it because I figured they were her friends. So I had doubt. I ended up giving the book to a waitress who I'd seen on the numerous times that I went to a small place called Stewie's in Matamoros, Pennsylvania. I gave it to Diane, the waitress. She read it, and she came back and said, Chris, I love the book, but she was crying. And I said, Diane, I don't want you to cry. She goes, no, Chris, I laughed, I cried, and I just want to tell you something. I just can't believe that firefighters went through all of these things that you went through. And I walked outside and I kind of like got in my car and I said, well, you know what? Diane's got to say nice things about it because I got to leave her a tip every time I come to eat. So I didn't believe Diane. What eventually ended up happening was I felt sorry for myself for a while after 9/11. And I wanted to give back. So what I did is I started getting involved with volunteer work around the country with the New York City Fire Department and the Red Cross. In 2005, I went down and spent 3.5 weeks in Katrina and the Gulf Coast helping people out, wanting to give back. And on the way back home on one of the trips down in Houston we actually did, there was this other fireman called Paul Lapano, like 6'3", 240-pound New York City firefighter. He was a lieutenant in 4035, which is down on Amsterdam Avenue. Paulie said, Chris, I heard you wrote a book. I said, yeah, I wrote a book, Paulie. He says, you mind if I read it? I said, no, I gave Paulie the book. So Paulie's in the airport and I'm looking at Paulie and I said, oh, wow, Paulie's really reading the book. The next thing you know, he says, Chris, can I read the book when we get on the plane? I go, yeah, Paulie. Next thing I know, I look across and I see Paulie's reading the book. I said, oh my God, Paulie likes the books. And we land in Philadelphia and our hookup was going to Newburgh, New York. We land in Newburgh and we land in Philadelphia, and Paulie comes over to me with the book and he says, Chris, I want to tell you something. I love the book. He brought me back to the firehouse, you know, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, and Brooklyn. It doesn't matter. It was like that book basically gave the message and the life of how we live our lives. And he says, I love the book. And I go, well, what chapter do you get up to, Paulie? He said, I got up to chapter 20. I said, well, you got 23 more chapters left and you're done. Then you can give me a true feeling. He goes, no, Chris, I'll wait till you publish it. So now I get on a plane. I said, that Paulie's got to say something nice because I got to sit with him for an hour. So what eventually ends up happening is we go land in Newburgh and Paulie comes over to me and says, Chris, listen, I love the message of the book, but I got up to the point about your father and how your father suffered with cancer and how your father died and the different things that you went through. And he goes, I didn't want to cry in front of anybody because I went through the same thing with my dad. And then I started realizing that the book really made a connection with a lot of people. And those 3 words of hope, faith, and never giving up all come into pack with what that book is about. And that's the message I want my kids to live with. There's going to come a time when the old man's not going to be here anymore. And I would love my sons and my daughters to hand it to my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren, and tell them, listen, this is what the old man was all about. He was a New York City firefighter that loved the job, loved his country, respected brotherhood, and loved America, and respected every soldier that ever went into war after 9/11 for us and served our country. And that's what it's all about. And I want to thank Phil Capadora, because Philly has done a lot of work. Philly's taken the book and he read the book and he more or less got motivated and inspiration to sit down and write a screenplay. And Phil has gone up and above and sat down and actually did a great job. Him and I have worked together on a lot of it. Philly's got a really good feel for how it is to be a New York City fireman. His dad was a New York City fireman also, Phil Capadora Sr. As a matter of fact, the day I met Phil Capadora Sr. was on September 11, 2001, when he was actually the chauffeur in 81 engine. When I jumped on the rig and I drove around, they got a call at about 1:30 in the afternoon for an odor of smoke at the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There was no towers. And what eventually ended up happening was the captain of my company was in the rig, and he turned around to me and he goes, Edwards, don't you get in this rig. I said, all right, Cap. The captain got in. He was kind of a big guy. He got into the rig, and I jumped into the rig. He didn't see me. I sat in one of the guys' lap, and he goes, Chrissy, you're crazy. He told you not to get in. But you know what? I wasn't going to go home. And I stayed in the rig, and what eventually happened was we went all the way down towards the South Tower for an odor of smoke. And as I got out thinking the chauffeur was going to make a left-hand turn, and Philly Capadora Sr. made a right-hand turn, and the captain seen me, and he had some choice words, and I said, Cap, I'm not going home. And I ended up spending 2.5 weeks in the hole down at the Trade Center, bringing closure to families. And the biggest thing I'd like for people to remember right now is don't ever forget the sacrifices police officers, firefighters, rescue workers, workers in the towers, And even the people that sacrificed their life, innocent civilians, that a perfect example is Wells Crowder, was a young man from Rockland County. The man with the red bandana is what he was called. So the sacrifices of everybody on that day should never ever be forgotten. And on the worst day of the history of our lives, the bad was bad, but the good will always be the greatest. And I want to thank you so much, Phil, for this opportunity. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.